Hi to all the very timely people. We'll get going shortly. I'll start typing up the hedge doc while we wait.
Good day, folks.
Hi there. Hi, Steve.
Back to normal, whatever that means.
Yeah, ish. So it's okay. Although last week was bank holiday on Tuesday, and actually did not join on Monday due to that.
It is not fun to be sick. I was just looking to what week it is that where Europe and US get off by the fallback of time.
It might be as early as next week. We go on the last Sunday of October. And I know it's 2 weeks, whatever that means.
That's November 5th. Wait. No, that's something else.
As far as I can remember, Europe changes 4th week in October after that, something like that. So it would be like shortly before Halloween. I guess the weekend before Halloween.
Yes, that makes sense. So it's November. It's usually a week off. So it's November 5th here in the US. So we can either cancel the meetings that week because everybody's meetings collide, or just pick their favorite.
The problem with cancelling those meetings is that the first full week of November is 1/18.
Oh,
so,
right.
We need to make sure we're ready. Now we can have light meetings. I think I've suggested that the one immediately before, which would be after Halloween, probably should be cancelled because it'll just be administrative and making sure we press the right buttons to get whatever drafts in. But the one before Halloween, I think we should still have because we need to make sure we've sort of picked our issues and all ready for 1/18.
Yeah, good point. King Ori.
I'm not entirely sure if that. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Hank.
I'm not entirely sure that I have not started my browser yet, but I'm not entirely sure if there is a meeting after Halloween before the IETF meeting. Is there?
I believe not. I think I skipped that one because in any case it's the day of the final deadline for submitting drafts and things like that, and it just didn't seem any point.
What? No. So why I'm asking this is because IETF starts on November something very early. Let me look at this. So the actual meeting starts on November 6th. That's a Monday, and October 13th. That's before Halloween. That's the last Monday already in the cutoff phase. So there is no space for a virtual interim after Halloween, because we are literally starting with the actual meeting then. That's my point.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
agreed. And I believe that's how the series is set up. I'll double check that. Okay, cool. So 5 past. Everybody's had plenty of time. So as hoped and promised, we want to get a bit more focused and outcome oriented here, working on actual issues and PRs. I think we had a lot of discussion around what we want. I think it became relatively evident what various people wanted to get out of the structures and updates. So if we take a look from the emails over the past just over a week, and the agenda item up on the Hedge doc now, we've got 3 PRs that seem to be good ones to review. Ori's not here right now, and so there was the PR proposing to remove feeds altogether. I think that spurred a very useful debate, but it seems like from the balance of debate on that ticket, it didn't necessarily move us forward in and of itself. But following on the heels of that, we've got the 107, which I put up, and then 108, which Ori put up, which I think is worth looking at, which is to potentially change where we encode feeds. And then there's the pull request that everybody should have had time to look at by now from last week, which is the one to add open API specification to the emulator that includes the ability to find things based on the feed they're in. And just as a preamble before I open the floor to people commenting on the PRs, and I will share the screen in a second. So the position we're in is that we have to have something reasonable to show at 118, and it makes sense for that to be an answer to the new problems raised at 117. And there certainly seemed to be consensus back when we were looking at this carefully, that the biggest issue to solve coming out of 117 is that the thing basically works. We were able to prove the use case. The receipt structures individually work, but that it was necessary for sort of applications to be able to use the SCITT building blocks to be able to somehow find, search, index, and understand what they're looking at. And so having a handle on what a feed is and how we link related claims together was the next important focus. So I think there's enough there now to do that if we look at these PRs, and in the spirit of rough consensus and running code, if we can get that sort of agreed and move on, then for 118 we'll be able to prove that, and then the next challenge, working with John Anderson and others, we'll actually be able to add the access control piece on at the front that he's been working on as the stuff to do in the 118 hackathon, and then sort of refine and correct that between 118 and 119. And once that's done, I think we've got a really good solid set of building blocks that we could go forward with. So yeah, so with that in mind, I'm going to share my screen. Well, before I do that, did anybody do a review of the OAS PR? That's the one on the Scrappy document, and have thoughts and thoughtful review to share before we just walk through things? I'll take that as a no. So I'm going to do things in a slightly different order then. I am going to share, not presentation view.
Sorry, John, was that PR 3.1?
That's, I think that's pull request 2 on Scrappy. Let me just double check that.
Oh, I'm a different. I'm sorry, wrong repo. Sorry. Disregard my comment, please.
Sorry, my fault. I pasted the one from the. Let me fix that.
Yeah.
But Ray, you put your hand up for a second. Did you have something?
Well, if I'm not, I'll tell you what. Let me just wait and see what direction you're going. I did want to comment on your assertion that we had to have the feed for non-repudiation, if that's the right term, requirements. I don't think that really is true.
So it's definitely not true for non-repudiation. It is the only thing we have currently for non-equivocation.
Oh, that's what I mean to say, non-equivocation. Yeah. And I don't think that that's true either. And you know, it doesn't. But when we get to that point, I don't want to jump the gun.
Okay, well let's have a look, because I'm mostly just interested in moving the work items forward, and as much as anything else, trying to maintain a proper position here. I was seeking not to really change anything, but just to clarify the document in the direction of sort of decisions and agreements already made, but clean it up. And I think there are a lot of places in the document where it could be much clearer. And yeah, we should spend time on that. So hopefully, let's get the words and intent and the cleanup. Yeah, decided slightly separately from other things.
Go ahead and lead the meeting, and I'll jump in when it seems right later. Thanks.
Cool. So, okay. So here we go. So, hopefully you can see on the screen, and thank you, Steve, for taking the notes while I'm sharing. You can see the PR here. So I think possibly the preamble here is longer than the actual spec change, but that's sometimes necessary. So just trying to answer a few of the questions and things that have come up, some of the things that have got us stuck in discussions over the last few weeks. There's a question over whether we need a feed at all. But if we don't do that, we can discuss Ray's point of non-equivocation very specifically in a minute, because I think it's potentially interesting. But if we get rid of feeds altogether, then there's nothing defined at all that gives us a shared understanding of how to link related statements together. And that feels like a great shame, because it's often necessary to do that, either to supersede one, or to have different versions of things, or to have completeness of some process. And so if we're thinking about security claims,
John, can I ask one? What do you mean there's no way to link? Can you expand on that comment?
Well, okay, yep. So good point. So I shouldn't use that kind of language. We should be solving problems. So the kinds of problems that are captured by the use cases and have proven useful in work that I've done, I think work that others have done on different supply chain projects, is to say that I have a thing in my hand, I have some sort of provable claim, I have a signed statement or whatever it might be, I've got non-repudiation of that statement for some variety of reasons, who cares? But I want to know what else it's quote unquote related to, because if I have a multi-party process which has multiple parties talking about multiple different steps in what is effectively the same process, or there's going to be a set of supply chain artifacts that contribute to a real world artifact at the end on which people rely, all of those statements and the real world activities that are described by those statements go into me assessing the trust that I can have in this this real world thing.
Okay, thank you.
If I've got a single certificate, if I've got a single statement from that series, knowing where to go to find the previous or next statement in the process, or knowing where to go to get the latest or previous of a version of superseded statements, is interesting on one face, but important in many cases to me, knowing that I'm operating correctly or making good, up-to-date decisions. So that's the kind of space that it's looking at. So when I said link, I actually meant find links. Yogesh?
Yeah. So basically, I would put it in a slightly different way. What Jor already you said, it's like logically grouping statements made about an artifact from n number of entities, and we need to have that kind of architectural flexibility to group those related statements about an artifact in a meaningful way. And I think that skit does feed does provide a meaningful way of doing that. So there's a great relevance from my point of view. Yeah, and that's all I wanted to say. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Yogesh. Yeah. Ray's back. Yep. Go on, Ray.
Yeah, so I did some reading on this non-equivocation topic. I'll find the article that I found about it, and after researching that, I think that there's no real way to guarantee to actually and to do that unless the other party has a complete copy of all of the statements, and because the machine that is providing them could fail to provide the prior statement, even though if you have a feed, and if you say, give me everything that you said about this, it may not provide that prior statement correctly. And so to guarantee that you got the correct, you have to have the entire set of everything and check on the machine that's giving you the prior statements. So for that failure mode of the machine breaking, so there was different levels of non-equivocation. I'll post that in the chat or whatever, so you can read at least that one article. But I do agree that something like feed is necessary. And I think that feed is not enough. We need to have, like this whole set of regular metadata that's used for querying databases, basically, of content. And so, yes, is it necessary to get agreement on what these various things are? Yeah, each one of them has to have the right name, and what the values are and so forth has to be something that makes sense. Same with feed, though. And so I think that trying to come up with this term feed is, I think it's confusing myself. I think it'd be better just to have the metadata that describes whatever the entry is, and then feeds, if you will, could be made by searching over that metadata and providing it. I don't see that the feed actually adds anything to the goal of non-equivocation, but I'm open to understanding that further. I'll post the article that I found so that people can read about it, and then make their judgment as to whether feed actually helps do that. I don't think it does, but it does certainly help find the stuff that, if you assume the machine is not failing and is not lying, then it helps you find the stuff that you could say, well, I'm assuming the machine is working correctly. I don't have to look at everything. Then this response that I have here, which says these are all the prior responses of what this particular party said. I think you actually have to go back to the entity that's making any claims and say, give me all of the claims ever made by the entity. Then boil that down to the ones that you're interested in by the metadata. The entity itself, in terms of the qualification using the key structure and anchor of trust to decide that you trust that part, that you know who that party is. That's part of the non-equivocation. But that's the only problem I have, and I think it'd be better off not to use this language about non-equivocation here, unless, at least for me, unless we have more, thorough foundation for why the feed is essential. You say it's essential. I don't think it actually adds anything, and I don't think it's essential. Okay, so let me post the thing that I found, and then that's my comment. But I'm all for feed-like things, and I'm all for lots of metadata to find things within the SCITT structure. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Ray. I mean, that's there's a lot of things in there, and I think the failure modes need to be documented, the same as, you know, SCITT has provision for access controls, but we don't talk about what happens when the access controls are circumvented or somebody steals your access token or something like that. Those kinds of things clearly need to be accommodated. So yeah, we could have all sorts of other ways of doing non-equivocation, and clearly if the transparency service doesn't give you the full thing, that's an issue on the transparency service. But for sure, yeah, it's a deeper topic. There's some way, as you say, having a way of finding all of those things, given pre-commitment on those things from the person you're relying on. That's the essence of this. So if we did it in a different way, that would also work.
Okay, I found the link, and I'll post it in the chat right now. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Steve, still on the first paragraph?
Yeah. So just on the feed, I think because Ori will make it later, so unfortunately
Okay.
couldn't be the first part. But I think what I'm hearing is we like the ability to have a collection of statements about an artifact. The question is whether there's a single property that is used to define it, or it's up. Different issuers can make statements around different artifacts, and they construct properties to do that. So what I'm struggling a little bit with is how do you have a consistent way to define the collection of statements made by different issuers about a specific artifact? That's the one that I'm struggling with this conversation, because I like the idea that a feed is a string, and if you want to use glyphs, or if you want to use, subject, or you wanted to use, any of the DNS, any of the other properties we were talking about, you could put it in there, and you can just, you can decide that is what you're doing, and but it's a pattern match, exact string match for that ID, and it's up to the issuer to decide what the type they want to use. If we're doing metadata, which is good, but that's the way you're supposed to construct a feed, I don't know how two parties would know how to construct a feed over the same thing. That's the part that I'm struggling with on this one. Roy?
Thanks, Steve. So interesting enough, thanks, John, for explaining your point. I could see uses where that will come in. To Ray's point, I get that as well. That's why I do believe there's a storage and a query system component to this over and above what we're talking for the notary here. The ledger's policy configuration, it still resonates as the only way to solve that is with the feed structure. I do believe that into Ray's sort of world, there are going to be authoritative supplies of comments on existing products like anti-malware or CVE endpoints that may not come to a specific SCITT instance. They may come as well-known endpoints on the internet that you have to go and talk to. In which case, and they're still merged together. And if SCITT instances are like DNS servers, then your corporate firewall or your corporate instance can augment and do endorsements on products that nobody out in the public will see. So it kind of gives a slightly different view that there's layers of this sort of flow. There is one question that we have to decide, which is by convention, do you always, if you're going to write content on a product, always have to use the same SCITT instance, or are you allowed to send to multiples and have consumers stitch them together. And I think that would be kind of weird. I think either you're sending them to multiple SCITT instances 100% consistently, or you're sending to one. And that is something that came out of Ray's comment that kind of resonated with me.
Multiple instances. I've been. This is a kind of popular topic for me. Is just as I think what you were saying is in the corporate or any environment where you have some private network, and you're making decisions around the software you're consuming. Companies do this all the time.
I'm thinking Steve, I'm thinking the one multiple instances would be in a physical supply chain where the U.S. Customs only believes one set of notarization serves as SCITT instance, and let's pick Ireland believes some other SCITT instance. So you have to submit to both a European SCITT instance and an American one, but you can't just ping pong between them. You have to do 100% to all of them. That
yeah, I guess there's probably instances for each of them, but what I'm getting, I just don't know if we could limit to one. Not that there's one master one in the world, but even one for a particular company. So in the model that I'm considering is the way security companies work today, right? Lots of companies put out software, and they do enlist in audits to have third parties validate that software, and it gets published on that company's project's feed. I'm using feed is too loaded now. Endpoint. So wherever you go to find that entity's information about the product, they put third parties' endorsements or criticisms about it either way. And so that's a single feed, a single SCITT instance model that you were talking about. But we also have where security companies publish information about other products on their endpoint. So NIST has theirs, and various security companies have theirs, and many of the security companies, they're behind paywalls because that's their business model, and that's all fine. The question that I think about there is, how can they all make statements using our terminology about the same artifact? So if I want to go to pick your favorite security company's service, what is the identifier that they can make a collection of statements? Because on Monday, they might say it's perfectly fine. And on Wednesday, they discover there's a vulnerability. And they publish on Wednesday that, nope, that software is no longer fine because Log4j became a thing. And I've been thinking the feed is the way that various entities can make statements around an artifact. And I don't think it has to be limited to one SCITT instance. The consumer has to decide which ones they trust, right? And that's a decision that they make, but it's the same decision entities make today.
I understand that. That's why I said it's either by convention that they have to submit 100% on one product to one endpoint, so people know where to go to look for CVEs, or they have to be and it's by convention. If they do to multiple, they have to do 100% for each product goes to 100% of so you can do this stitching together. It's when they start ping-ponging and I start trying to figure out how the heck would they know where to go looking for CVEs or VEX statements or whatever, that becomes super painful if you allow them to ping-pong. And once again, it's by convention, and I don't think we have it codified anywhere.
Is the notion like what would be helpful, I guess, in the case if you had multiple SCITT instances and people are trying to find everything regarding that product? I think that makes sense that we're going to have to think of that, because like you said, there could be, in a given supply chain, there could be multiple SCITT instances along the way. And under the control of different entities that need to control it. And then we would have to, this is a difficult question here. How do we and have people find across those SCITT instances the same, product as it rolls through.
Well, the product is identified by the SBOM identity identifier, so that has to be consistent. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So I think I'm not too concerned about that. The problem here is knowing who to go look at becomes problematic if you allow it to float.
Right. Okay. So yeah. So who to look at, and then, all right. Thank you for opening up that dark pit of information. Thank you.
Sorry, Ray.
Okay, Glenn. So Yogesh, let's take you, and then we're 25 minutes in. So hopefully we'll cover the rest of the PR and come back to whether that closes off the remaining things. So Yogesh.
Yeah, I was wondering just while Ray was discussing this, there are two issues. As Roy mentioned, what if the same the statements for a particular artifact is across multiple SCITT instances? How do we utilize that information and then query meaningfully? That's one problem. The other problem is there are n number of statement issuers for a particular artifact. How do they coordinate among themselves? What is the right feed to use, and mm, and what's the uniform mechanism to poll for look for data associated to a statement? So there are two distinct and different orthogonal problems. For the latter problem, I was thinking maybe with the artifact, if bare minimum information is supplied, which is kind of which is the end users to construct the feed or something like that, then anyone who is the consumer of the artifact knows how to get associated statements from the registry, or whosoever is allowed to get the fetched data from the registry has the knowledge to how to utilize the feed or how to construct a query and get the data. I was thinking in that direction. So we can associate a particular feed mechanism to an artifact, and we cannot stipulate that in the spec, but we can give an example of that in our guidance documents, or wherever we are publishing examples, or the API documents or stuff like that.
Yeah, and that definitely sounds like a profile, and a lot of what we've discussed today sounds more like profile on top of a very basic spec. And the question to be distilled here is whether the basic spec is usable for those profiles. So I think a really useful way of moving forwards with this would be to add to the use cases document, because use cases doesn't have to be as bold as tracking vulnerabilities in software. It can be, I've got a thing in my hands and I need to check that it's valid versus invalid, or I've got a thing in my hands and I want to check that it's the latest one versus I have no idea where in the world this has been attested and I need to search the entire global internet to find attestations. Those are very different use cases that we better or worse serve with the current state of the spec. So let's make sure if we have any, particularly if we have objections or strong feelings on things, let's make sure that the use cases document or the preamble to the architecture actually specifies that we're actually trying to solve that problem, and then we can solve it.
Yeah, I think best you described, I fully agree that it is like a kind of a profile specific parameter. So I kind of think that we should make the feed as one base type and make the type extensible in CDDL so that the profiles can extend it to the way they want to use it.
Right.
And keep that flexibility in there and not talk much of how it should be used, but keep it at a very high level so that profiles can connect to it and expand it the way they want to. Would be the best middle term agreement for this deadlock situation.
Cool, thank you. Good. So if I with that sort of spirit in mind, this hopefully is not controversial. There was a suggestion on a different PR, which, as I mentioned, had a lot of very useful discussion on it. But I think the discussion was, again, very two-sided, whatever, not really coming to a conclusion. But it did raise an interesting question that the documentation on registration info was not particularly good or clear, and it's as currently specified and as intended by the original authors of the spec. Registration info is for something different. So while I wouldn't say we can't or would forbid transparency services from indexing on things that's in there if they want to, this doesn't feel like the right place to put a thing that allows us to group statements about artifacts, which again, we seem to be coming to the group conclusion that we want to do that somehow. So I put some clarity in there. And then do we need to have a big first order structure for the feeds? I think this was a question that really arose from 117. This was the wording that came out of 117, but I think we keep going around it, and my conclusion certainly was that no, in order to have a decent baseline specification, we don't need to have a structure. Just the single simple match will do. And indeed, if we decide, because we're about to look at the other PR, which suggests a different place for this concept, but if we decide to merge this on the grounds that we want to have a concept or set of concepts that can be profiled to provide this capability to link things together and find the things that link together, then there's no necessity for it to be heavily structured or specified. So that was the intent. Yeah, before I go into the actual changes, Roy, go ahead.
So the only problem we were trying to solve, which I still don't see without either a feed or some other thing, is to know when identity providers are reconfigured for the ledger to accept. And that problem still remains. Right. If you argue that this we want to simplify and not deal with that, then the whole discussion of having feeds and all the rest of it can be postponed until to the future. But that is the one remaining problem that I continue to see, is I don't know when some administrator goes off and enables a route that nobody else trusts.
Yeah, so there's a couple of thoughts on that. I know this is, well, I say I know, I believe that this type of conversation has led to conflating registration info and access control and feed before. So I guess my thought on that is that we need to solve that separately. So either we could have a convention or a necessity, possibly, but I would suggest a convention to include changes in visibility and access configuration in the feed, or rather as a transparent statement with the same feed ID. And that's, I have some interest in that because that's the way my product does it. But I'm not wedded to it. It's just an example of a thing that works well, is that the complete set of transparent statements includes every time there's a substantive change to the access controls. And the other thought would be, as well, or instead of that, we still need to sort out this thorny issue of two-way transparent registration policies, and I would like to move that part of the spec forward as well, but just doing everything all at the same time is really hard. So my hope and belief is that sorting out this bit with the grouping can be done independently and move the work item forward, and doesn't stop us from doing the thing you mentioned. It just makes the problem set a bit smaller. But that's sort of my thoughts on why I'm trying to drive the work in this order. And if that's wrong, of course, we'd need to revisit it. Yes.
Yeah, John, one notice I was reviewing your pull request while we were discussing, and one place I have a question, maybe you can answer later on pull request, is you removed artifacts, removed software artifacts and changed it to generic artifacts in the document, if I'm not mistaken, some places.
In 2 places where it was redundant, yes.
Okay.
So it's still in about 18 other places, but the places where it was written where I removed it, it didn't seem to make sense.
Okay, because I was little just concerned that because our initial charter is specifically focused on software supply chain, not generic supply chain, so we should remember that before making such kind of change. But I think you have
Yeah,
taken care.
if you review the whole document,
Yeah, yeah.
there's no substantive change there. It's kind of conceptually wrong
Okay.
to suggest that every artifact in a software supply chain is a software artifact.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you. Another aspect quickly is while I was reviewing the architecture, I found a great ambiguity. Probably you touched on this subject, is the registration info coming from the issuer, what he is issuing in that, and then the registration policy coming from the transparency service. So I think we need a bit of work to do in that aspect of clarification, and maybe probably change the words or change the narrative in a way that is not confusing between the clash of the direction and the content of the data between registration info and the registration policy, which are two different things, I suppose, if I understand correctly.
Yes, there's a ton of work to do there.
Yeah.
It's a separate topic. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
super unclear right now.
Yes.
And I would like to get that fixed, but we need to move along in a tangible way with small problems we can actually solve. So yeah.
I will raise an issue on this if you don't have if we don't have already. Then. Thank you.
We might just have a quick look, because we might do. We attempted to tackle it before, but then I
Okay.
think we just decided Cedric just sort of deleted it, and we said we'd come back to it. So just have a quick look, and otherwise raise an issue.
Cool. Thank you so much. Yeah. Cheers. Over to you.
Well, Ray, actually, yep.
Okay, well, I think actually this Yogesh just kind of mentioned what I had in mind, and that is, it seems like it'll be helpful to split reg info into 2 parts. One is metadata that is about the artifact, that is probably structured in such a way that they're, with common names and stuff that are used in the industry for the attributes. And then the other part is attributes about the registration policy and stuff that has arisen or is part of the actual submission to the SCITT registry, and not metadata about the artifact itself, but about the actual registration process or policies. And I think that would solve your anguish over having metadata type attributes in reg info, and that seems like a proper type of anguish to have, and yet provides a place for that other metadata. And then it broaches the question, is that other metadata the same thing as what we're considering to be the feed? That's a question I'm not sure I understand. But feed seems like, as I'm getting to understand now, may be still necessary so that there can be some kind of a name that will propagate amongst any number of places that it would be used, that would consolidate, allow people to track individual sets of artifacts. Okay, that's my input. Thanks.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, and Ori's here now. I appreciate you've been here quite a long time by now, Ori. So taking all that together, what I would like to suggest is, so yeah, Ray, absolutely, and I think a couple of other people said it. It has to be possible to sort of decorate these things, and it has to be possible for transparency services to offer some degree of metadata finding, retrieval, caching, all sorts of other stuff. So we certainly don't want to stop that from happening. But we don't have to actively specify how to do those things or what those things are. So simply having a dictionary where you can throw metadata which is not necessarily secure metadata about the statement that you're making or the artifact that it's about. Yeah, I like that idea too. I think it's a great idea, and I don't think we've prevented that. But related to that is this second PR that we wanted to talk about, which was this one, which is the later of Ori's feed, of Ori's contributions on it. Because what I would like to suggest is that people take a proper look and look favorably on the word content and the tidy up and the clarity that comes from my PR 107 to say we want to have this concept that joins things together, and get that merged, because I do feel like the words are better than the words that were there before, and then consider this submission from Ori that shows actually we don't necessarily need to have a special separate named thing to group them together, because we can just use existing CWT claim elements. So at this point, I'd like to, if you're ready, Ori, hand over to you to explain how that would work, and whether we want to sort of merge 107 and 108, or whether we want to do a bit of work, or maybe come up with a combined PR that does both.
I think AJ is technically in front of me, so maybe he
Oh,
should go
sorry, I
first.
didn't see. Yeah, sorry, I'm screen sharing. I didn't see the queue. Yeah, AJ.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Do I remove myself from the queue and then bring it up later?
I can take you out if you like. No, bring it up now. We're running short on time, so you should.
Fairly junior to this. The edits as standing in 107, even though I was present at 117, we'll pretend that I was paying 100% attention. I was completely aware of things that were being discussed. This clarifies a lot of stuff that was unclear to me with better wording. So I have one outstanding question, but I thought it was helpful, and I don't know if I can approve or not. But beyond that clarification and sticking to the objective of the pull request and what it's intending to do, it clarifies what's intended for me enough that I understood it better at the end. So I don't know what else is beyond that. I'm done.
Great, thanks, AJ. Good. So well, that's positive. So yeah, so that can stand, and then I need to change the tab I'm sharing. And yeah, so what would be interesting, Ori, is to look at two aspects of this. So one is whether we can replace the feed element with a CWT claim. I'm reasonably convinced we probably can. That makes sense. But the other sort of slightly broader thing to think about then is whether we can generally add custom claims to this Cozy Web to also include a kind of arbitrary list of stuff that SCITT doesn't understand, but the application uses that our members here do. So over to you. You can either screen share, or I'm happy to scroll for you.
Yeah, if you could just scroll as needed, that'd be awesome. So basically, I was reading your pull request, which clarifies the sort of intention behind feed. And I want to echo something I think you said earlier. I think feed has become very conflated between the act, the way that the issuer uses feed when they're trying to discuss their signed statement that they're preparing, and then the way that the transparency service might expose feed as something that you could subscribe to. Their feed gets used in both of those cases, and I do still think it's highly problematic to use the same language in both of those scenarios. So if it is possible, I would like to preserve the behavior that we have in the document, but find language that distinguishes between the role the transparency service plays and the role the issuer plays. And this pull request here gives us a path starting to think about the issuer side of this. So, recall that the issuer makes their statement a sign, protecting it with a digital signature, and in the process of doing that, the issuer fills out the protected header, which is a metadata section with integrity protection. And the issuer can put details into that metadata section that are going to be relevant to the transparency service. The transparency service is going to be using them as, looking at that protected header to make decisions regarding the registration policy. And so the registration header parameter is one section of the protected header that contains transparency service specific claims. But there's another header parameter that you could include called the CWT claims header, and that's a very new, almost RFC. So it's not technically, the tag 13 in the protected header is not yet an RFC, but what it does is it allows for us to use claims that are really valuable in context of SCITT. So I don't know if you can scroll. If you could actually pull up the IANA registry, which is, if you go to files changed and you look at there it is on line 670, the IANA CWT registry link. Yes, that one. So this is a registry that's maintained by IANA, and registry entries here are updated by specifications. You can see it has designated experts. In fact, Hannes is one of them, so he'll be very familiar with this registry. The point that I'd like to make is we have in our current architecture document, we have the proposal to add the issuer as integer tag to the protected header, and it's like a 300 something, 341 or 342 or something like that, like tag. But we don't actually need that. We could use this tag 2 or tag 1 in this registry is the issuer tag. So it can go in the protected header is already defined here. It's ISS, it's issuer, it's a text string, and it's 1. So we can do that, and then there's the subject parameter here. And as far as I can tell, every use of the word feed when we're discussing what the issuer is doing is in 100% consistent with the way that the subject is used in CWT. So the subject is the entity about which the issuer is making claims. And in the context of SCITT, we've been saying sentences like the feed identifier for the artifact about which the statements are being made. So these are very close sentences. Subject is a text string, feed is a text string. You can add, typing information into the subject by using structured identifier in the text string. That would be things like a URN or URL, but it's not required. And that's true of feed as well. So basically, you're not losing any of the normative behavior that we have to sort of replace the word feed with subject. You could keep the word feed associated and say the issuer makes statements about a subject. The subject is an identifier for the artifact about which these statements are being made. And when you ask a transparency service for information regarding a particular subject, that is used by the transparency service to prepare a feed. So I'm not changing any part of our architecture. I'm just giving us some concrete code points without us having to define them in our document. So we can reuse this registry and preserve 100% of the behavior that we have in the document today with no changes. It's also slightly smaller. So I think this is, tag 13 is small, and then tag 1 is small. And there's other parameters in this CWT claims registry that might be relevant to other SCITT use cases. So, I would be cautious sort of making the other entries here, but you can see that there are actually a lot of RATS related registered claim names that could overlap use cases. In the future, you might have a transparency service that's evaluating the hardware OEMID as part of its registration policy. And in this case, you'd have a very clear layering between cozy CWT claims in protected headers and SCITT. So one other point I'd make is that a lot of folks are concerned about tokens, like whether it's JSON Web Tokens. For some reason, token causes people to get concerned. And I confirmed with the authors of the RFC in question that you can use this CWT claims in a protected header for something that has a payload content type of XML or JSON or anything. So you can use this structure while securing arbitrary content types. That's important for SCITT. That's important for SCITT because our supply chain ecosystem has a lot of different content types. We don't want to get into the business of course at that layer. We want to secure the content types that are happening that we can see. And we can do that while also making use of these registered claim names in this IANA registry. So the PR, all that it really does is just show you how to do that in CDDL. Hopefully this long explanation has been helpful, but I'm happy to answer any questions folks have.
Great, thanks. So I see AJ in the queue. Thank you, Ori.
Ori, very vague and not helpful, and that's being very sarcastic. I guess my main question is, how do we know that the top? Okay, so if we're going to use the concept of a subject being the source of the thing people wish to discuss in a feed, how do we know it's always going to be one identifier that everyone agrees to all the time, with a consistent, exactly one identifier as the quote unquote subject? And how do we know that people will not be talking about a range of them, as a group of them? Because I won't name our favorite one from a certain US governmental institution, but having fuzzy topics or subjects of topics, whether we use this feed metaphor or not, is usually one of the biggest challenges in dealing with this kind of information.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying. Steve and I had a really long chat about this on Friday, and I was yelling at him on the call because the text string feed has no structure to it. Casing differences in the identifier for the artifact will cause different groups to form. So if your goal is how do I get everyone to identify, some software release at a specific version consistently, enter string values in is not going to help you. It's actually going to make that problem worse. So what you'd like, hey, transparency service, I am trying to talk software vendor's product. You identify that software vendor's product so that when I give you signed statements, my signed statements go in the right bucket. There is a discovery issue with the index that you build on the protected. The index that you build on the protected needs to collision problem. You're looking for collisions. You want to cause collisions, but you won't be able to cause collisions in the transparency service unless the transparency service helps you cause those collisions by exposing some categories or topics to use. So I think you have about talking about feed as a concept that the transparency service exposes, as opposed to talking about registered protected headers that are the structure that issuers rely on artifacts.
I mean, I understood what where Ori is coming from, but I'm slightly nervous in prescribing a particular solution as to how one should structure their statements within the transparency service, or how the transparency service should identify internally how the statement should be structured so that a meaningful query can be done. We can exemplify it in a profile, that's a fine thing, but we cannot prescribe that in the base architecture as to how one should prepare these strings or whatever metadata needs to be aligned in this particular way to construct a feed or whatever you want to call it through the header parameters. I think that we don't want to kind of restrict the supply chain to use only a particular way of preparing the queries and stuff like that. Thank you.
Okay, so let's so Ray, I'll give you a point, but just since we're out of time, let's everybody, if you've got an opinion, make those opinions on the PRs, please. Yeah, soon. Ray, you can have your time if you want to.
No, I'm fine. I just think this is great. I like the subject, but I do agree that naming things and with consistent names is never going to be solved completely. And
no, I
Yeah.
don't think this. I don't think Ori's thing makes it any better or worse than with the explicit feed entry. There's still an issue. So yeah, good. Okay, thanks. So yeah, everybody, if we can get, it was good discussion last week. If we can keep the discussion going and push the PRs forward, so we can commit some of these changes, that'd be fantastic. And see you all online.